What's going on, everybody? It's Adam Ayala, your modern psychoanalytical relationship specialist. Today, we're going to be talking about sexless relationships. Not many of you know MGTOW and what it means and how this is affecting modern relationships. I myself have criticisms of the premise of going your own way, which is what MGTOW means, men going their own way. But you always have to listen to individuals and communities that are not of your own to come up with truer understandings of them and not just have ideas about them that are just founded on your biases that are based on little to no facts. I found a MGTOW coach, and his channel is called the Ronin Man, where he speaks about sexless relationships. I'm going to answer some of the questions he has and talk about some of the points that I disagree with him on and input the science of psychoanalysis and relationships into his ideas about sexless relationships. I recommend that all of you go watch this video. It's about an hour long, and really listen and try to understand what he is saying, even if you don't agree with him. I'm going to put a link to his channel and this specific video down below in the description. A core purpose of a meaningful relationship is understanding the other person who you will inevitably disagree with and learning how to agree with them without being destructive, while also being open to learning something new, because they most likely know something you don't that is valuable to your own life. So I hope to be able to sit and talk with the Ronin Man one day to talk about some of these things, because even in his own video, there are things he says that we don't have the full context for, and it wouldn't be right just to make final judgments on his ideas. And I'll be bringing one of those up. Also, another purpose of relationships is understanding the other person and not just agreeing with them because it sounds and it feels good. If you just agree with me or the Ronin Man or with anyone, then you're just ignoring your own needs to satisfy them, while at the same time satisfying your desire to have no responsibility. This is what we see a lot in relationships. So you got to be curious, listen critically, listen thoughtfully, and listen openly.
How does it start? Sexless relationships don't start like you would think. They don't start with a plan. Nobody decides, hey, I'm going to have a sexless relationship. This is it. It's insidious. They start one way and they end up another way. And the person doing it doesn't even realize what the end result of this action is.
The Ronin Man is correct that it is rare that one starts a relationship with the goal of having a sexless relationships. These kind of relationships most commonly develop because of negative feelings such as resentment and anger as the relationship progresses. One common and not spoken of problem is that often what happens is that a person in a sexless relationship will repeatedly find themselves in a sexless relationship no matter who they are with. They are either the person who is repeatedly rejected or rejects. Individuals don't go out and seek to reject or be rejected, but they keep finding themselves in this situation. This is what psychoanalysts call the repetition compulsion. The repetition compulsion is that you're compelled to repeat patterns of old relationships, and you repeat the patterns of old relationships because those patterns are comfortable, because they are familiar. So I'm going to give you a quote from Dr. Zettner. He made a book called Self with Marriage, The Foundation for Lasting Relationships. He's a clinical psychologist and psychoanalyst, and he is the director of the Greater Kansas City Psychoanalytical Institute, where he's a supervisor and a trainer there. So I'm going to break down this quote piece by piece. So Dr. Zettner explains that the absence of sex shows a significant limitation in closeness. So let's talk about what this means. In action, this means an investment in the pushing away of the other person through limiting intimate contact, such as kissing, smiles, hand-holding, and of course, sex. This isn't necessarily conscious or unconscious, but a mix of both. He continues with a quote and says, and frequently negative feelings about the self and about the physical body. So what are some excuses people use to limit sex, males and females? A lot of people will say that they have gotten fat. They're old now, so their libido is low. They're on their period, they're tired, or any other number of excuses. This is what modern psychoanalysts call the narcissistic defense. So the narcissistic defense basically means that we will attack ourselves, calling ourselves old, or saying that we are tired, instead of dealing with the problem in the relationship and our own problems that are affecting the relationship. Here's the next part of the quote by Dr. Zettner. So then, unconscious conflicts in one and usually both partners often abound. So let's talk about unconscious conflicts. Unconscious conflicts in oneself is talking about the history and mental health history of each individual person. We have scientific literature that shows that we repeat the relationships we first had in our new and current relationships, which is another part of the repetition compulsion we just spoke about. Even popular culture has caught on to this idea when we speak about girls with daddy issues and boys who are mama boys. Those are silly titles to serious maturational difficulties and deficits. So we're going to continue with the quote. So unconscious conflicts in one and usually both partners often abound, even when the ejection of sexuality from the relationship has become an unconsciously agreed upon solution to attenuate intimacy and sometimes anxiety in the relationship. So there is this other psychoanalytic understanding that people get together to solve their psychic conflicts. This is why good girls go after bad boys, for example, and they try to fix them or change them. And good men will go after bad girls and try to save them. This is the savior complex. They're trying to fix something in their mind's past in the present. The unconscious conflicts that individuals have within themselves create much tension and anxiety within the person and within the relationship. So that means that the sexlessness of a relationship is used to reduce and devalue sex from the relationship, because intimacy brings closeness, and the majority of our unconscious conflicts had to do with closeness and the anxiety closeness creates. It's easier to be apart than it is to be close to someone else. So let me talk a little bit about anxiety, because when we hear anxiety, we know what we're thinking or talking about, but most of the time we use anxiety in the incorrect terms, or we think about anxiety in the incorrect terms. Anxiety is not a feeling. When you say, I feel anxious, you're using that word incorrectly. That's pop culture or pop psychology. Using the word anxious is actually a way of not describing what you are really feeling, but to describe a state of being that you are in. An example of this is that you just can't say that you feel asleep, but you are in the state of sleep. It's the same idea. You cannot say you feel anxious, but that you are in a state of anxiety. This means that when you are anxious, you're experiencing a state of anxiety, and that state of anxiety is used to shut down any type of communication about what is going on. It's a biologically useful and constructive state to have, because you can't just always vomit what's going on with you and say things all the time. It's not appropriate. But we inevitably take it too far when it becomes destructive in our lives and in our relationships. So let's bring this all together and start to answer why sexless relationships develop. So we're going to call this the unconscious agreement. So the individual in a relationship who is rejecting sex is creating distance and communicating some negative feeling towards the other person in a relationship. So this is what the rejector does. The individual in the relationship who is being rejected also creates distance in the relationship by not exploring and dealing with that rejection. The person who is rejecting sex will say, if I push you away, I don't have to talk about the problems, so agree to not ask me. The person who is being rejected then says, okay, sounds great. If I don't constructively explore why you're pushing me away and use excuses as it would be too rude to ask, or, oh yeah, they probably are tired, I won't have to deal with the unsaid problems in the relationship. The deal is made and your relationship becomes sexless. You both agreed. So this seems to not make sense when you're thinking about it rationally or when it's in front of your face. So what is gain in a sexless relationship? We can understand a little bit about the gain of the sexless relationship. We can understand why this may even start. So not having to deal with the initial and continual rejections will give the rejected person a great excuse to leave a relationship because they can become the victim, or even to stay in a relationship because they can become the victim. There is legitimate pain in being rejected. If you're trying to touch someone lovingly, you want to have sex with them, even hold their hand, you're looking for a smile, and they don't give that to you, there is real pain. But it's not the whole story. The rejected person immediately takes the position of not being responsible for the relationship falling apart because they aren't the one rejecting sex and intimacy. So it's a trick. If I don't ask, I don't become responsible for the relationship having no sex. The person rejecting is also making themselves a victim and trying to walk away from the responsibility of a relationship. To push one away sexually is you not taking responsibility for the destructive feelings and thoughts you're having and just acting them out in a way that shuts out the other person. Then this person who is being rejected can say, you don't ever talk to me, you don't ever pay attention to me. And this dance continues back and forth. So there is no innocent person in a sexless long-term relationship. If this is happening 3 weeks or 3 months into a relationship, make the constructive choice and be responsible and walk away, because that person isn't close to being ready for a committed relationship.
The relationship at that point, if you're honest with yourself, it's probably over already. Because she's starting to reject you on a regular basis, and there's some reason in her mind. And I know that there's a lot of counselors who want to take your money and they want to, have you guys talk about this, talk about that, and it's going to fix it. And I'm not against counselors. I think it's possible there could be a counselor that could uncover this stuff and somehow repair it. But your best option as a guy is probably to get out of there at that point.
Here, Ronin Man lets us know that there are a lot of counselors who want to take your money, which is aka just rob you, let's be honest about the language, and have you talk things out and possibly uncover the issues to fix them. I'm going to surprisingly agree with Ronin Man here, even though I'm a modern psychoanalytically trained psychotherapist. That much of couples counseling isn't worth it. I'm going to give you 2 reasons, 2 major reasons, but this is not an exhaustive list. The first reason is that couples go to counseling when it's way too late. And this is really the number one reason couples counseling doesn't work. And I can't even blame the counselors for this one. I'm going to have to be honest about it. A lot of couples come in when someone's already moved out. They're already decided they don't want to be together. The cheating has gone on for way too long and has happened way too many times. There's no way to do anything about it. And most of the time, people just go into couples counseling so they can blame the counselor for the relationship not working, or to have an ally and so they can say, see, the counselor says that this relationship is no good. They're not there to fix the relationship, to work on the relationship. It's not useful. The second point is that most psychologists and counselors don't realize, and they really hate to realize and admit, that too much of the training that they get, of the non-psychoanalytical training they get, is to quote unquote help the male in the relationship understand and communicate as a female would, without helping the female learn to communicate and understand how the male communicates. This is a major problem that isn't going to be fixed by the American Psychological Association or by institutes of psychology, but has to be remedied by each individual counselor. So the Ronin Man is correct, and I don't have to give him credit for that. But his solution for men is just to leave the relationship. And listen, it's a free country. You can leave a long-term relationship without trying to understand what's happened, right? You will just find yourself in another relationship that is too similar to the one you're leaving, because you didn't put any of the work in to understand yourself, or to understand why the relationship is ended, and to understand who the other person was and why you were attracted to them. And there's one misconception about working with a proper relationship specialist, is that you're paying money to go to them to save your relationship. I'm going to say that's true, and this is what Ronin Man was pointing out, that's the goal of, say, the family and marriage counselors, and that's the goal that they have in mind for you. And I don't recommend going to someone who immediately is going to force the counseling the way they want it to be, or to force an outcome, for them to guide it and be biased towards that way. You're not there to save the relationship necessarily when you go to a proper relationship specialist. You're there to understand your part in the destruction of your relationship, your partner's part, and how to never repeat that again. You're there to break the repetition compulsion. If within all this learning and understanding, you both see that it would be most constructive to work on the relationship and to build it and to try to save it, then that's what you do. But even if one person doesn't want to be in a relationship, you can explore that and see why not, and then move on accordingly. And if both people want to work on a relationship, you have to do the same thing. You have to explore that and see why, to make sure they're not making a mistake again and staying in a relationship. No answer should just be taken at face value.
I'm not against counselors. I think it's possible there could be a counselor that could uncover this stuff and somehow repair it. But your best option as a guy is probably to get out of there at that point.
So this is my critique of Ronin Man's advice for people when they find themselves in a sexless, long enough relationship. If you just break it off and you don't do anything about it, you will find yourself in another relationship unless you put in some of the work. Even if it's just some thoughtful reflection with yourself, your buddies, or a specialist individually. You have to break this cycle. But yet again, I'm going to say again, if this is happening 3 weeks, 3 months into a relationship or too soon, then yeah, just leave. You're not invested. You don't have kids, you're not living together, then the best thing to do is just go.
The sex is only a small part of it. What actually disappears when the sex disappears is pretty much everything. So love disappears, all positive emotions disappear, little cute texts that she used to send you disappear, smiling when she sees you across the room disappear. These little things that make life meaningful, or they make a relationship. That's why you in a relationship, right? Is you want to be with somebody that makes you feel good and you make them feel good, and you know what I mean, that you want to share things, and that's why people have relationships, right? So
here, Ronin caught onto an important word when it comes to relationships in general, but really hit what a sexless relationship is a symptom of. A sexless relationship is a relationship where each individual, and hence the relationship, has no meaning. You gotta ask yourself a couple of questions when you're in a relationship, especially one that's sexless or going wrong, and for even ones that are going right. What are the common goals you two have together for the relationship? What are you guys working towards? But before you even answer that, let's dig even deeper into this question. You have to ask yourself, are you sure those are your common goals, or it's just someone playing follow the leader? A lot of guys become the plow horse for a woman's goals. They sponsor her life and they never get anything because they never ask for anything and never fight for their needs. They will make up excuses such as, I work too much, so I don't have the time and energy for me. That can be true in reality, but that's a garbage excuse because you can make some changes. You're just investing in not changing, because if you do, you start asking for what you need, you're going to be responsible for attaining those needs and then maintaining those needs. At the same time, you're going to have to see your spouse for who they really are. And one fear we have is that our spouse may not be able to give us everything we need. So we choose to have nothing instead of risking not getting what we need and seeing the limitations of our lover. And this is the same thing with women who just support their husbands' careers and never ask or fight for what they need until it's too late. This is a great way of protecting them and protecting yourself. You live in the delusion of safety. Here's another question. You're going to ask, what are your individual goals for yourself that enhance yourself, and then which hence enhance your relationship? Who are you? Why? Where are you going? How come? How are you going to get there? Do you know the type of person who you should be in a relationship with that can inspire you to attain those goals? And another question, are the individual goals of your partner something you see as worthwhile? And this is a major, major thing. Because we can have sex with about anyone a few times, but You won't have sex with someone in a long-term relationship that you don't find meaningful. And more importantly, you also won't have sex with someone long-term if you find your life meaningless.
In the garbage, if you search sexless relationship, you can see the titles of the articles, and 90% of those are women writing those articles. Guys just don't write about this stuff. But there's many more guys being rejected than there are women in the world. But if just reading the women's stuff, you can kind of understand how you feel when you're rejected. The problem is you get used to it. So when you get treated badly, it just becomes a normal thing. It's like, okay, this is the way I'm treated. It's like, it's difficult to see. And also you're having all these conflicting feelings because you're feeling like.
So no. Getting used to it, quote unquote, getting used to having no sex in a relationship or sex once a month in a relationship, it's just an excuse both individuals in a relationship give, and everyone just buys it. It's a garbage and excuse, and it's a promotion of one's own nihilism. It's the same nonsense excuse as if someone who was in a sexless relationship, right? You're not having sex, and you brought it up to the person who doesn't want to have sex with you, and this person who doesn't want to have sex just says, it's just the way I am. They don't want to change. And their nihilism of saying, it's just the way I am, or this nihilism of, oh, I'm just getting used to it. It's just an investment in having a meaningless relationship, and it shows how the individuals understand themselves. This is again part of the unconscious agreement the two individuals made in a relationship to not have meaningful sex or a meaningful relationship, so they don't have to deal with their own mental health issues or the issues in a relationship or their unconscious conflicts. If you believe this excuse when someone tells you it, or if you give this excuse to yourself, you're investing in having no sex while making believe you're making progress in a relationship by having the quote-unquote solution of getting used to it.
Because the person who's shutting down the sex is totally controlling sex now. So when the sex gets doled out, it's going to be a surprise to the person who was being rejected. When you date a lot of women, you're going to have women who do this. And when you sleep with a lot of women, there's certain women that just use this, and I don't know what the reason is. The reason could be many things. A lot of people blame it on chemicals, low libido, and stuff like that. Or maybe they worked in a bar or some situation where, they were damaged. They were damaged sexually because they maybe got abuse from clients. Maybe they had some situation when they're younger with their father. There could be any number of millions of reasons, but none of those mattered in the beginning, but all of a sudden they matter. See what I'm saying? So they don't really matter because they were there in the beginning. It's kind of like some guy saying a girl's not hot after he's been fucking her for 2 years. Like, if you didn't notice he wasn't hot the first time, then why do you notice now, right? It didn't matter then, it doesn't matter now. So it's same with sex, but...
So here, this is where Ronin Man and I completely disagree. And this is where I was saying earlier, maybe there's some context to this that I don't know. But let's just talk about it as if he meant what he said. It's imaginative and wishful thinking that everything should be easy, and the person should or can be upfront about everything about them by the time you sleep with them. And if they're more complicated than they showed, then let's say on their first date, it somehow becomes irrelevant and it doesn't count. It's as if you got together with someone and they had heart disease, right? And the symptoms weren't showing when you got together. And then you can say a couple years later, the symptoms show up and you tell them that it doesn't count. Your genetics and how you ate your whole life before you knew this person and all that doesn't count because you didn't sign up for these problems. This is part of our narcissism of wanting the person we are with to be who we wish them to be and not who they are. I wrote and made a video about this, and I'll post a description, or I'll post it down below. So people are severely complex for better and for worse, for both. And if you agree with the idea that if a person's trauma history causes problems later in a relationship, and that since it showed up later, it shouldn't count, then you're not suited for a long-term relationship because you don't want to deal with what is an essential part of a long-term relationship. And then this will be my question. My question is, what is the cutoff date for showing all these issues? Is it 3 months from the start of dating? Is it after spending 48 hours in total with a person that their trauma history and life experiences don't count? When and why? So you get to know the other person at a deeper and deeper level. And at those deep levels, you will find a lot of things you aren't going to like. Just as they get to know you deeper and deeper, they will find your past history, which influences your current actions, that they won't like. Also, dealing with the complexities, especially the negative complexities of another person in a long-term relationship, forces you to look at the complexities and at your own complexities. And most people don't want to do that. So they either say that it doesn't count, or they leave to start a new relationship, which inevitably starts off shallow. Now, this is what many serial daters and people who marry, 10 times, or people who are just in one after the other and serial monogamous people, they don't have the ability to deal with the complex feelings of themselves or the other. They can't tolerate those feelings in those states. Without this basic tool, you won't be able to create or find meaning in a relationship or in your personal life that will propel you into long-term satisfaction. And then we also shouldn't confuse accomplishments with satisfaction. You could be a miserable billionaire.
Everything from jokes, humor, caring, giving, everything's shutting down. And it's crazy that people stay together in these situations because there is nothing left. And it's like, it's such a joke. I mean, most relationships are such a joke that I'm just flabbergasted what's happening in the world today.
I'm going to have some empathy here for the Ronin Man. Talk about crazy people stay in relationships like this even though there's nothing left. Look, there's plenty of left in this relationship, but I get what you're saying. So here's what's left. Both individuals get to be victims. They get to complain and never have to take responsibilities for the problems within themselves or the relationship. The person who rejects sex will say, oh, they don't communicate with me and they're so distant and they're always angry, or all they want is sex. And the person who's being rejected can say just about the same thing. They never want sex. They don't communicate with me. They're never close to me. They don't care about me. It's just about a mirror image of each other. So, but you're right that there is nothing meaningful left. But this kind of relationship is a delusional safe space for the minds of the two people. These two people in a relationship like this are committed and invested in doing this dance with this other person. They're used to it. They're used to blaming each other and feeling like victims, and they get to write blogs and say, oh, how awful this is, or they get to stew and be angry at the world, whatever gives them pleasure, So they're used to it, the relationship. They're familiar with it, and it won't change because they think they have control over all of this. So I agree with you that there is nothing constructive left, but that this dance is pleasurable.
And I do want to warn you about one thing, is I remember the first time this one girl declined me for sex. And she said, no, sweetie. And she never said sweetie before that. And she said, she had a big smile on her face. And I think she was really angry, and she was very resentful, and she was enjoying saying no, actually. And so I remember this big smile that came across her face. And I was like, that's interesting, and then sweetie, the word sweetie. So if you're hearing a lot of words like sweetie and honey, but you're getting no sex, that's another sign it's another sign that something is seriously fucked up.
So this is a brilliant insight the Ronin Man had, where he talked about his girlfriend and the no sweetie as she smiled. Understanding how much pleasure someone gets from rejecting you from sex will just open up your eyes about just how brutal life is in general and how negative people really are. This is that saying of killing you with kindness. This kindness is hostile and a destructive force. And the smile and calling him sweetie, something that's supposed to be nurturing, good, that's what was hostile and destructive in this situation. There's other examples of this. Someone who always cooks for you and they cook you some awesome fattening meals all the time and they say they just want to make you feel good. Or those who work 70 plus hours a week, your whole relationship, and they say that they're doing it to make sure you and the kids have anything you want. These are all investments in the merging of a relationship. You're killing people with kindness, with goods, and with services, all in the service of cutting connection. Just want to give you guys my final thoughts on all this. In the end, there's a lot of theory, and you can come to my office and lay on the couch and we can dig in forever to understand what's going on. We can go back to your mom and dad and your first memory and all your dreams and all that, and that's wonderful. That's great. But at the end of the day, if the relationship you're in is meaningless, you don't see a way of having a meaningful relationship, or if the other person doesn't want to invest the work to have a meaningful relationship, you need to leave your meaningless relationship. I'm going to put a video down below where I talk a little bit more about this, about leaving meaningless relationships. So sexless relationships are a clear symptom of a meaningless relationship. The best thing to do is to figure out just enough of what is going on to make a good enough decision. You don't have to know everything. You don't have to know that this came because your mom did this on February 19th and when you were 7 and you react this way. It's good to know, and it's useful, and it helps you break that repetition so you don't ever do it again. But sometimes you got to think a little bit more short term than that and get out of a bad situation you're in today. So tomorrow you can work on yourself and find someone else that is as good as you and has the same values as you and who's going to inspire you and actually see you for you, and then have a meaningful relationship that's full of sex.